Hey now, everybody. Welcome to the Cardinal Stand Out in Your Career podcast presented by Alumni Relations. I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Relations, Nick Taylor, and I am extremely excited about today's topic, something near and dear to my heart. But before we get started, I want to introduce Dr. Erik Trump. Dr. Trump, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Nick. Pleasure to be here.
So we go way back on this topic. I don't want to say way back. It's a rather new topic, but you and I have been discussing this topic often. But before we get started in discussing all things AI, can you maybe give us a little bit of your experience with AI and kind of what makes you qualified to talk with us about that today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is honestly one of those topics where I feel reluctant to say I'm qualified to talk about. I'm not a computer scientist, but in my role at the university, which is as the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, as soon as AI hit our landscape in the summer of 2022, I realized immediately, okay, this is really big for what I do, which is try and help faculty be the most effective teachers that they can be. And actually, one of my colleagues, Philip Hansen, who's an art professor, started us off because he came up to me at the summer picnic, back to school picnic, which I'm sure a lot of the people listening to this have been to. He's like, I'm having an existential crisis. I'm an artist. I make digital art. I spent the summer making digital art with AI. I've made tens of thousands of images in just a few months. He says it would have taken me hundreds of lifetimes to have made those by hand. And so he gave a talk to the university later that fall. And his question to us was like, hey, this is images, but pretty soon it's going to be text. Are we prepared? What are we going to do? I was like, wow. And then November, like a month after he gave his talk, ChatGPT dropped. And it quickly became the most quickly adopted app ever of all time. And so by January, my office is like, AI, what you need to know, start to rethink some of the things that you're doing in your classroom, because a lot of the traditional assignments, ChatGPT could do them reasonably well, even at that time. So in terms of my, my experience and my qualifications since January of 2023, every single day, I both at work, but also really, to be honest, a lot of my free time at home, I'm reading articles about AI. I'm trying to read as broadly as I can, not just in the higher ed community, which I do at work, but then when I'm home, I'm like looking, well, what's going on in the world of business with AI? Where are the investments? What are the people that are in this field predicting for the future? And then through my official capacity at the university, continuing to encourage faculty to look into this, to research it, to play with it, to practice with it. And we're really lucky. I mean, SVSU has fantastic faculty. And so there have been scores of faculty who have spent time in faculty learning communities, literally a whole year, just looking at AI tools and figuring out what do these mean for us and for our students. So that's, my qualification is basically, I kind of am immersed in it I'm thinking about it every day at some level.
I love, and your timeline is so spot on too, because I think back to my own experience with AI and conversing with you and talking about some of the applications. You talked a little bit about what faculty are doing on that. Can you maybe share some specific real world examples of how AI is kind of transformed workplace, either efficiency or productivity? I've got some examples, but I want to hear yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in my capacity now, I'm really more on the administrative side than the classroom side. So, let me list all the ways that I'm started using ChatGPT. And I should say I got a subscription, with my own money. It's not even, this is just, I paid for this. I'm like, I need this personally.
Me too.
Back in January, right? And I know a lot of colleagues who, same thing, right? So what can I use it for? Well, first, I taught writing for years. That's my specialty. But every writer gets stuck sometimes. You're just like, how can I say this a little bit better? So I'll just pop it in, say, give me 3 different ways to word this. And I'll take one of those. It's like, that looks pretty good. Maybe make a little edit. Increasingly for just productivity, where I know what I want. I've got ideas. I draft my ideas very quickly. I take it to ChatGPT. I'm like, please develop this into a full memo, right? And it fills in. And by now, of course, if you have a subscription, the AI learns what your interests are. It learns what your language is. It learns what your preferences are. And so it can turn out a memo that's, a reasonable approximation of my voice in seconds based just on a few notes that I've written down on what my subject area is, et cetera. So it's really helpful for, some of the things I have to do. I have to communicate like you.
Sure.
Right? We communicate with many, many people every day. Mm-hmm. Sometimes those are somewhat form letter communications, but you want to personalize them. Mm-hmm. Well, I can just say personalize this for all these people. It knows what I'm talking about, like what I need to send them,
Sure.
a little reminder about, et cetera. And it can generate that. And I can go through, edit really quickly. It saves hours. We do workshops, right?
Okay.
So in our workshops, faculty members present, usually for an hour or so. There's a lot of interaction with the people in the workshop. In the old days, what we used to do is we would post that person's PowerPoint if they had it or some notes, and that was it. There was a period during COVID where they were all videotaped, but like no one wants to watch an hour-long videotape of a workshop. So now I just record the workshop with audio, turn it into a transcript with Otter AI, take that transcript to ChatGPT, tell it what the topic is, say write a knowledge article, include links to references that are relevant, make it appropriate for this kind of audience, faculty members who couldn't attend. It does that. Then I say, write a shorter blurb for our newsletter, right? Just the highlights. It takes 10 minutes,
right,
maybe to generate all of that and to have it out there. And it's a record of what we've done. Sure. Anyone can go back and can learn from that.
I think it's amazing.
It's amazing.
When you say the efficiency and the time saving, you just said, think of all those steps and doing them in 10 minutes.
Right.
For me personally, in the workspace, we were very successful last summer hosting a conference here on campus. Really proud. The staff that work in our office did an amazing job. Yeah. But there were certain tasks. And I hate to use the term menial because I don't believe that any task is menial if it's done really well. But there were certain tasks that I could just assign. For example, we took in all of these different session information, session proposals, and I used ChatGPT. I'm also a subscriber based on your recommendation a couple years ago, and took the session proposals that came to us and said, okay, what tracks do you see?
Right.
What are some common themes among this? And then from those common themes, ChatGPT, I then said, okay, here are our final 15 sessions.
Right.
Create me an agenda and schedule them out for me. I've hosted lots of conferences in my professional career. That was one of those things that I can remember getting up on the whiteboard and writing, okay, this person is speaking at this time, so they can't be here. Yeah. Having ChatGPT, I was able to do that in less than an afternoon, which would have taken me several days worth of work just to get through that sorting.
It's the sorting, the arranging, the categorizing, the figuring out different configurations.
Right.
I mean, we do the same thing. We'll do it in staff meetings where we're brainstorming. We're like, okay, what can we do here? And somebody will just put it in. Like, what are some options? And we'll get a couple of options like, okay, that's a good option right there. Let's go in that direction. It's also so useful for making meetings more efficient. So many times you show up at a meeting and there's a lot of like discussion and throat clearing and like rambling with ideas.
Come on.
I mean, any meeting does it, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's the nature
absolutely.
of human beings getting together. And so it's easy to come prepared to a meeting with a document that you generated very quickly with ChatGPT that addresses some of the directions you might go, some possibilities you might consider. It gives you something very concrete to talk about. And it's never like the final version. It's never perfect. But what it does is it prevents you from getting sidetracked into a little digression that then, derails 15 minutes of the meeting time. It also makes it a lot simpler to sort of see what action points are. Like, what should be the outcome of this meeting?
Right.
And you and I, we were on a task force that I put together, informal task force to try and figure out, okay, what should our university strategy be with AI? And, we just got a bunch of people together and I put together a document with ChatGPT and we looked at it and we all had input based on our experiences in different offices. Well, let's say this and this, and,
Sure.
And within what I think it was 3 meetings, like we came away with a document to share.
Absolutely.
And that ended up being a policy statement from the provost's office back in 2023, sort of giving faculty some guidance of how to move forward with AI in their classrooms in the fall. So
and I think it was, talking about some of that work, it was incredibly helpful, not just for the faculty, but also on the student side to kind of consider as students are learning with faculty, because we're all learning this together, being an emergent technology. It was a great guideline for that. I do miss, I'm going to reminisce about the old days of AI. I do miss, we used to have a lot more Zoom meetings or Teams meetings, and I could just take the transcript.
Sure.
So speaking to our audience, we're talking to alumni who are professionals out there. This was a little cheat tip that I would share is, I would use these Zoom meetings, whether they're one-on-one or large scale meetings. I would always record the meeting and then have it send out the transcript of that meeting and then run that transcript through ChatGPT and say, okay, give me the major points and decisions and action items that were made through this meeting, so that anybody who missed that meeting now felt completely caught up to that.
And now we're so close, and maybe we're even at the point where theoretically within a meeting, you could have an AI open and listening to the meeting and making real time suggestions. You could have an AI an AI member an AI member actually of the team, and you could assign that member a role and say, we want you to play this role in our meeting and interject when you hear something, because
my mind is already racing.
There's the voice capability there, right? So it's totally plausible.
So going down this, the role of AI in meetings, what are some ethical considerations, and when we say ethical considerations, also some potential biases that we see associated with AI in the workplace right now?
So I mean, because I use it a lot, and I trust the outputs to varying degrees.
Sure.
The biggest, I don't know if I would call this an ethical concern, but it is to a certain degree, is that it's sort of like you're getting crowdsourced information most of the time. You're going to follow the herd. Right. Unless you're very, very careful about how you're using the AI. It tends to default to offering you an answer that it thinks you will like based on what most people say.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's scraped up all this data, human data, and it's looking for patterns in the data. So that means that you need to be very, very careful about the quality of what it's offering you, because although many times, what it provides is like, oh, that's creative and I wouldn't have thought of that, et cetera. If you really start to dig into it, you'll notice that a lot of times it's just telling you what you would find if you went and looked at the top 10 websites or, the top 10 business articles, et cetera. And sometimes that's great because you're looking for what's the consensus view on, for example, the best way to start discussions in a classroom, or the best way to write a memo for this purpose or that purpose.
Can I give you an example right now? We were in the middle of hiring a position in our division recently, and I used ChatGPT. I said, okay, these are the core competencies that we need in this position. Can you tell me what would be the best questions to ask in an interview?
Right.
And sure enough, it started spitting those out, but we needed to go and tailor them very specific to our needs in there, because it was, like you said, a conglomeration of what's out there already.
Right. And so what that means is that a lot of times you're not going to get the original thinking. So for example, in my world, where one of the big concerns for faculty is like, well, how do I AI proof a course? Right? Because it's very easy. And we're showing faculty, here's how to take your course and share it with AI. And the AI will tell you, here's what I could do as a student in this course. Here's how I would approach the course. And then you can easily flip it around. You're like, okay, now pretend that you're going to help me out. What could I do to make it so that students won't be tempted to use AI, or it'll be difficult for them to use AI on these assignments? But what you'll find ChatGPT does is it tells you certain strategies that are just the strategies that people recommend online. They're not necessarily strategies that work. So for example, we'll say, oh, well, instead of an essay that's a research essay, make sure that it has like some personal dimensions in it. It's like, well, okay, but and the AI can fake the personal. I mean, I don't, as a professor, you don't know who your students are, right? Their personal lives. So any personal details could be totally made up. But but because that's what many faculty are doing across the country, because initially it sort of seemed like, well, that would be a good way, right? It doesn't know you, Nick, right? So, but it can fake you.
Right? I feel like I missed the opportunity in some of your classes, to be honest. I could have crafted a whole new experience.
Right. You could be whoever you want.
Exactly.
Right? So I think that's one of, it's not really an ethical consideration, but it's definitely a bias.
Yeah.
The other bias is that it does lie. I mean, it outright lies in the sense that, unlike like your real research assistant, if you ask Nick, it's one of your interns in the office or one of your assistants in the office, go and do this thing, come back and tell me what you found. And that person goes and is like, I just couldn't find anything. Like I don't get it. ChatGPT is not going to say that.
Right.
It's going to tell you something that it thinks you want to hear. And there was a really great example I read the other day of this. And I think it's the kind of thing that lets you know what you need to be very aware of when you're using AI. So this guy essentially prompted ChatGPT. He's like, hey, I'm looking for this article. I need a summary of this article. And he gave the title by Alfred E. Neuman. Right? Alfred E. Neuman, of course, is the famous Mad magazine character, fictional character. And so ChatGPT is like, oh, excellent. Of course, here's a summary of the article. Okay, the article doesn't exist, but it provided a summary. So then he asked the reasoning model. Now, the reasoning model is one that actually takes a longer time, and it will show you the steps it's thinking through as it provides the answer. So it says, step 1, I'm searching to see if I can find this article. I can't find the article. It says that. I can't find the article. However, I want to please, basically, I want to please the prompter. So I'm going to make up an answer based on what I think probably the article would be about, given the keywords in the title, etc.
Sure.
And so it says, oh, of course, here's the answer.
That's amazing.
And it tells it. So it knew that it didn't know the answer.
Right.
But it wasn't going to tell the prompter it didn't know the answer.
I feel like ChatGPT or AI in that instance is a lot like my 5-year-old daughter.
Exactly. I mean, maybe it's learned too well for humans.
Exactly.
Right? I don't know.
Well,
I think the deeper answer is that it's been trained to get rewards for providing answers which people want, and they want some certainty. So,
it goes back to that original intent or original piece of thought of the prompt and what you're asking.
Right.
So off the cuff fun question, what's your favorite prompt? You get a chance to play.
My new favorite prompt.
By the way, everybody listening is going to go put this prompt in right now, just so you know.
So my new favorite prompt, because of the problem I noted of the way that it tends to give you herd information, is now I'll add a little phrase at the end. I'll say, in addition to answering my question, give me I'm trying to, I have it written down, so I'm not remembering it very clearly. Give me an answer that draws in a completely unexpected and unrelated and unlikely source to make me think about this completely differently. So in other words, I'm prompting it to not offer the answer that I'm expecting, or that and most people would expect, but something that's way out of bounds, right? Totally different.
I'm super curious now. So, what's the weirdest source that's found?
So it mentioned the Treaty of Westphalia, for example. I was doing some research, like, okay, playing around with the idea of like, what is the future of the university with AI being so prominent, both in education, but also more broadly in society and the economy. And it had been giving me, a lot of sort of standard answers, things that you would expect. But then when I put that prompt in, it's like, well, if we look at the Treaty of Westphalia, maybe we might see universities, emerging as like tiny nation states with, it went into this whole like thing about diplomacy. And I was like, okay, well, that's really weird. And I don't know that it's relevant, but it served the purpose of just making me think in a different train of thought, right? From a completely different perspective, and one that I wouldn't have come up with myself.
I think there's some, not here at SVSU, of course, but I've met a lot of university leaders who diplomacy could be a skill that we need to sharpen along the way.
And I have some colleagues, they'll do things like in your answer, give me one answer from the perspective of a harsh critic of my question itself.
Oh.
Like you just think it's the dumbest question in the world and explain why. Give me one response from the perspective of a very supportive colleague, but who has, my best interests in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of assigns roles to the answers, again, to try and broaden the range of responses so that it's not just that kind of like, oh, that's great. Because there is a real tendency, and I think that's the weakness. We tend to like it, whatever we're presented with. It's like, oh, that looks good, know. And so if you're only presented with one option, that's the option that looks pretty decent. But if you have to start choosing, and you're the one who's doing the evaluation, rather than the AI making that choice, that's probably the most effective way to use the AI.
You mentioned the options available.
Yeah.
Recently, as I've asked AI to help me craft diplomatic responses to email and something, they've been giving me several options to kind of pick and choose from.
Right.
And I've watched, and there are times where really option one is the one that I would have gone with anyways, but I'll choose option two just to make sure that I'm keeping my algorithm personal and a little bit more broad sense, because I've noticed it started to write, obviously in my voice, sarcastic, but professional and fun. And just trying to make sure that I'm not overemphasizing those points personally along the way. It's just, as a professional, and as our folks who are listening are professionals, that's a great point to keep in context, to make sure that's always not trying to just please you. Right.
Because it definitely is going to please you. And we're just talking here about large language models, right? Not about all the other kinds of AIs with which I'm not super familiar, comfortable using. Like I don't code, but for people who understand coding, from what I read, again, I have no personal experience here. I'm relying on people like George Corser, computer science professor here. It can speed up the coding process tremendously, or the debugging process tremendously, and allow you to solve problems, much more quickly than you would be able to otherwise.
I think that's the biggest point about AI in the workplace, is it's not it's not going to strengthen somebody's potential. What it is, though, is going to make them much more efficient. And I think that's a really key point. And as a manager myself, and working with employees and seeing folks around the university, that's the exciting part about it, that you are a great professional. I want more of you. And how do we continue to become efficient in order to help that way? Now there's some ethical questions there.
And I don't know where the at the moment that's what AI can do. It's kind of an open question as to what happens as if artificial general intelligence is developed, or if the AI agents become really capable. Here we're talking about AI agents, meaning rather than just asking ChatGPT to do something very narrow, you have a ChatGPT agent whom you can give a more complex task to. So, for example, you were talking about the arranging all the details for a conference. You say, this is your task. Here are sort of the parameters for the conference. Arrange all the details for it. And it then, my understanding is that in theory, and I know there's some working beta models that people have tested, it goes out and uses other AIs to all operate simultaneously, and it kind of is a manager. And so they're they're finding out who your potential speakers could be. They're getting together a list of an invitation list. They're creating a program. It's doing all of that in the background. And then it gets back to you in a day. And it's like, here, your conference is ready to go. So that is a little bit more. That's a little bit beyond sort of like, oh, I'm just using this for efficiency. And now you're talking about maybe they don't need me anymore.
And that's the biggest, that is the concern I think when we talk about the apprehension of AI, you know, a lot of folks listening today might have only dipped their toes into AI and are apprehensive because they're worried about replacement. And I think it's a major consideration across the board. It kind of leads me to this next question about, you know, how do you see AI shaping leadership roles in the decision-making process, especially at that executive level? We have, I know we have some C-suite executives who listen to us all the way down to, you know, introductory jobs in the profession. We've talked about the efficiency at that level, but at the C-suite level, what are some considerations that you think we need to make?
I'll be curious on what you think too. To be honest, I think the speed is still, at this point, the kind of primary way that it affects leadership, in the sense that if leadership is often about gathering information, conducting research, analyzing options, talking to stakeholders before making a decision, right? You're observing, you're orienting. Okay, so this is what the landscape is like. Now let's orient ourselves in relationship to that landscape or that problem. You're making a decision. Here's what we ought to do, and then you're acting on it. It seems to me like that whole process is speeded up by AI.
Yeah,
because the orientation, the observation part can be done much more quickly. The orientation, figuring out, okay, what are our options here, can be done much more quickly. And then the decision, which, you know, really requires usually like some writing, some sort of like, we got to put this into a format that everyone can understand. That's speeded up. And then the action, the implementation is potentially speeded up. So I think speed is probably going to be, at least initially, the largest way. Beyond that, I don't know if I'm enough of a visionary to imagine exactly what it could mean. I mean, you read this hype, and I'm not sure I totally buy it, that like one person could start $1 billion company, you know. Like, I don't know what that company would be exactly.
I have a favorite saying about that, and I can hear some of the folks that I've worked with in the past groaning through the microphone right now by me even saying this, but I have it written up on my whiteboard every day. It's not rocket science, it's elbow grease. You got to do the work in order to be successful, right? You know? And I think I'll give you one real world example to kind of validate what you were saying about speed, but also about decision making at an executive level. Quick plug, I'm going to look directly in the camera. If you're not a part of Cardinal 100 through SVSU Alumni Association, you should check out Cardinal 100. Cardinal 100 is a program that, you know, at that conference that I talked about, some of our staff went to a session where another university provided this example and showed what they were doing with their 100 club. This is the idea that 100 alumni will give $100 and then come back as a group and make a decision based on what they want to spend that money on.
Okay, sure.
So rather than me just going and asking alumni to give $100 toward this, I want you to have some buy-in and come in, and we'll provide some examples of projects, and then we'll vote democratically and do this. And so I was really, you know, the other university gave a great presentation. The staff that attended were really gung-ho about the idea and the project, and I could see their excitement. But I had a nervousness of, is this feasible for us with the resources that we have and the expectations that we already have in our office? I didn't want to sacrifice events that we're putting on or some of the engagements that we're already doing. And so I really took some time and used some AI to just kind of take a look at and say, okay, what's the feasibility? Give me a resources list. How many hours does this take for our communications person to put together a really good communication, to make sure that we're not only recruiting enough folks to donate, Cardinal 100, as I look directly at that, donate to Cardinal 100, but also make sure that we are getting enough project requests in so that for those alumni, it's really worth the time. And through that Chat GPT prompting session, it really pointed out some things that were really important.
Yeah.
That didn't necessarily come across in the discussions that I had with the staff. Now, they may have had those discussions amongst themselves, but it wasn't front of mind for me. And again, it was, talking about those different perspectives. I'm always very worried about my blind spots.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah,
I know what I know.
Right.
But it's more important to know what I don't know.
Right.
And after kind of giving it some of those prompts about resources allocation, time allocation, looking at our alumni base, did we have enough of an alumni base? Was $100 too much, too little?
Right.
It gave me really good consensus data, and I'll admit that going through the process now that after our talk right now, but it gave me enough of a positive feeling like, okay, we can actually make this go. We can make this happen with the resources that we have. Like, this is a real possibility. And from that point on, it was kind of my, to borrow Matthew McConaughey's book, it was my green light moment. And where I said, okay, let's do this. And it's been awesome to watch the staff get energized about it. Something they all believe in. Something I think is going to be kind of a feather in their cap professionally down the road. And also, it's really fulfilling a great mission of what we're doing with the alumni office of engaging and connecting alumni to the institution so that they feel valued and they're bringing value to the institution. It sets off all the alarms and all the good stuff. And so what I see from the leadership side is, I can reach out to folks in my network, folks like you, and pass ideas along and get their feedback. But this also allows me to kind of go in and say, okay, give me the realistic expectation. What's it going to cost me? Staff has put together what they think it's going to cost. Let's see what everybody else kind of the consensus on. So we're in the middle of that process. We already got a great start as we sit today of the Cardinal 100. I think it's going to be really, really successful for us. So it's been interesting, but at that leadership level, I think it fits with what you're saying.
I think that sounds right.
So, we talked about the leadership roles. We know that the world of work has changed dramatically post the pandemic. Are there examples of AI that you can think of where does AI play in improving employee engagement and well-being? Like, how has that had any impact?
Again, I'm going to speak from my limited experience with my own office and with the few people that I know who've been playing with AI who are not in leadership roles. So one of the things that's really great is it does have a very empowering impact, right? In the sense that for someone who doesn't spend most of their days writing memos, writing emails, doing all the kind of stuff that you and I spent years and years training for, but is still faced often with the reality, like, I need to write something and other people are going to read it and I want to put my best foot forward. And so that ability to take something that you've drafted and to get it polished by the AI. And I've seen this, and people are like very, very happy to like, oh, that's exactly, what I wanted to say. And they tweak it a little, just like we do, but they can do the very same thing that you and I do. And the thing in, your question, I like that is about well-being. I could do that to somebody's writing, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And I would be very nice about it, et cetera. But it's still kind of a little bit like, this person like put a lot of, green or black or red marks or whatever on my draft, whatever it is, and like changed it. And I think one of the things about just like the way in which you see that is whether it's a markup on Word or whether it's a printed out copy that has notes on, is like all the stuff you did wrong. Right? Because it's all the things that are changed. But when you give that same draft to ChatGPT and you ask it to improve it and you tell it what your message is and who it's for, it comes back with this totally new draft. Well, totally new as in the sense there's nothing red on there. There are no marks or anything. And it gives you a very affirmative, like, oh, this is a really great idea, right? And let me know if I can help you more.
Sure.
Do you want any more refinements? And that personal friendliness, I've had somebody who tells me, he's like, I really kind of like my chat GPT, right? Because he's so friendly to me, it just always makes me feel good in the interactions. And obviously, right, they built that in.
Sure.
They want us to keep going back over and over and over again. But the reality is a lot of things that we do as employees, are very mundane and they're kind of, they're thankless tasks in the sense that no one ever does really thank you for doing them. And so if you're engaged in some way with an AI who puts an emoticon, a smiley face and a rocket, great job, we're taking off here. It's like, it's just fun.
Sure.
Right. And I think that's something that one of my colleagues gave a presentation the other night about how she has, slowly stepped into the AI world. And she did it really first from the perspective of just trying to do things that were fun, like make images, etc. And discovering that, like, there's a way in which the interactions can be pleasurable. Now, and I know there are people who are very concerned about that. And they're like, this is a dangerous path to go down.
There's a couple movies about that.
There are movies about that. You might have seen Her. If you haven't, I totally recommend it.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
So there are some very deep philosophical concerns about that. But at the same time, your question is very pragmatic. What role does it play in improving employee engagement and well-being? And I think it, at least at the moment, that can be a kind of a positive role. So.
Yeah.
And empowering in the sense that it gives people the ability to do things which, and I'll give you another really concrete example.
Sure.
It's often very disempowering to ask somebody how to do something, like a technical thing. But, I don't know all the features on Word. Now all I need to do is, instead of trying to go through that help menu, which is never very helpful, I just ask ChatGPT, I'm trying to do this thing. How do I do it? And it gives me very clear directions like, oh yeah, perfect.
The perfect example I can give you is my wife now believes I'm an Excel wizard.
There you go.
I can do amazing formulas in Excel.
Yes.
It's not me. It's ChatGPT, and I don't have the heart to tell her. She's going to find out probably here in a little bit. But it's, I think for well-being, that sense of, that gratification of doing a job well done.
Right.
It's allowing folks who maybe don't have very technical skills and things like Excel,
which is me,
right? Or even in you mentioned in writing, or that giving that polish, that final push without asking for a ton of help, additional help.
Yeah.
And I think you still, I think what's important about that, because I've had friends push back and say, well, that's AI doing the work. That's not you doing the work. And that's going to be, replacing you eventually. And I say, well, somebody had to be there to tell AI that this is what needed to be done.
Yeah.
I couldn't just put in, my director didn't just put in a prompt. They came to me with a task and a large, and then I had to break that task down into its logical steps.
Yeah.
And I think that's, that may be on the horizon with AI. We talked about some of those. I also laughed when I first thought of this question. It took me back. We used to have this family ritual, the Sunday night grocery store run, right? And we'd write out the big list and we'd go through and we'd pick it all. And I laugh because we talk about well-being. We still have that ritual, but now it's just fun. Yeah. Because I've taken all the thought, I shouldn't say the thought, the menial task of writing it down, where 5 minutes before we're going to leave, I pull out my chat GPT. I stand at the refrigerator door and say, okay, we need milk. We need bread. We need, oh, wait, scratch that. There's milk back here. I didn't see. And I can put my stream of consciousness in chat GPT. And then I have my favorite prompt, if you were to ask me, is I ask chat GPT to say, okay, from that grocery list, create a grocery list now where I'm going to be visiting, and this is not a commercial for anything, I'm going to be visiting Costco, Meijer, and Aldi. Which things need to be bought at which stores and in what aisle would I find them? 2 minutes later, 30 seconds later, I get this list pulled out and I have it saved. And now my kids, my wife, we can go and we just we go and get the things we need, and it's become a game.
Well,
and without too much extra ending up. Because I have that list, and we're only visiting those aisles.
Well, and in 5 years, you'll just have your robot get in the autonomous car and drive over there and get it all for you.
So, we always go to that.
No, we have to go there.
And we may not be far off from that.
Yeah.
And there may be benefits.
No, we might not.
So, we talked about some of the fears and some of the apprehension. What can organizations, well, let me ask this. How can organizations address concerns or fears that employees might have about working alongside AI? What can we do?
Well, that's a good question. I think that, you mentioned, you kind of alluded to it earlier, that a lot of times people are very afraid of AI because they have not used it at all. Depending on what media outlets you're watching, there's a lot of fear, hype. And certainly when it first came out, the Terminator references were ubiquitous.
Skynet is out there. Come
Skynet, and so that sort of overarching anxiety about not just technology, but AI specifically, is a barrier probably for many people. So if you're trying to address the concerns, I think, my colleague's presentation the other night where she's like, I just started trying to do some fun things with it, like make an image, make a meme, etc. That is a way to experiment with how it works, which is easier than going like all the way to, a professional, polished kind of purpose for it, which is difficult sometimes to conceptualize if you haven't played first, right? I mean, it's sort of, I suppose it's somewhat like our, play is always the first step towards learning more in depth. So I think that's probably the, one way to alleviate some concerns. I mean, other concerns might be very legitimate. I think that there are, again, the data here seems sketchy so far in terms of how many jobs AI is replacing, but it does seem clear that it definitely is replacing some in the sense that people are not getting rehired or not getting hired for positions when people leave.
Sure.
And you can it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see which positions are most vulnerable.
I think too, we're speaking to alumni of the university, and I have always contended, or I've always put forth the idea that when you earn a bachelor's degree, what does it say about you, right? We talk about that a lot. What does it say? A liberal arts education or an education in a specific field, when you have that bachelor's degree, having that general education, like, you have the critical thinking skills necessary. And the world of work is always going to change. When I first started in the profession, I had to teach my predecessor, my director at the time was a guy we both know and love. But I remember writing down mnemonics for him to learn how to put an away message on an email, right? Because it was just so foreign to him and the way he worked. But it didn't change as technology progressed. We have the critical thinking skills available to say, okay, how can I use this for my advantage? And I think that's the point of having you here today and talking to our alumni, saying, okay, you have those critical thinking skills out there. Like, how are you going to use them in order to continue to be better at whatever your chosen profession is?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Nick, because there's a ton of like AI training out there that people can take. I don't know. A lot of it to me seems unnecessary. The typical kind of AI training is like, we're going to spend one module learning what AI is. And then we're going to spend another module learning what large language models are. And then we're going to spend another module learning about the ethics of AI. Then we're going to learn about the biases in AI. Then we're going to learn some prompt engineering techniques. And it's like, that's a pretty terrible class. Like, if you were trying to, offer like a well-designed course design, something that's engaging, something that engages your critical thinking, et cetera, they're basically just kind of information dump courses. And they don't invite curiosity. They don't invite creativity. They don't really invite critical thinking on the part of the person who's learning. It's just sort of like, it's sort of the worst stereotype of an online training.
Yep.
It's like, watch this for an hour, and answer 5 questions at the end, and now you can move on to the next module. And I think that your point about what's the value of a bachelor's degree in the first place, the value of a bachelor's degree is not necessarily the very specific skills you learn. Some of those obviously crucial depending on what you're going into, but it's the broader skill set of critical thinking, the broader skill set of communication skills, the broader skill set of some skepticism, right? That, that idea, it's in English 111 of like trying to like determine, are these sources reliable or not? And that habit of mind of having some skepticism, having some critical thinking, having some curiosity, those are skills that transcend AI, but they are also the crucial skills for being able to imagine what could you use AI for. And I think that that's kind of the big question that people who already have a degree are well positioned to ask, which is, if you play around a little bit and just sort of see, well, what is it that AI can do? Then you can go back and you can ask yourself a more foundational question. What could I use AI in my business, in my profession to do? You could also sort of go back and ask yourself, if I had had access to AI as a student when I was learning, what would I have used AI to learn? How could I have learned more effectively? And again, I'll give you a concrete example of a colleague who was going to Japan. And he's like, okay, I'm going to be going to Japan. I don't know really any Japanese. So he wrote a prompt for his ChatGPT. Every time you give me an answer, I want you to put in a few Japanese words with their translation and pronunciation so that I learn some Japanese, some key words. It'll be used, just some words, right? Just a little vocabulary building. And then he built another prompt, which was a more specialized one, which was the syntax in Japanese is different. So he's like, I want you to start putting my answers, English answers, into a Japanese syntax so that I start to like kind of think about the relationship between the vocabulary and the way that a Japanese person does. So, that's something that takes that kind of creativity, that imagining what you could use the AI to do that would be very difficult to do otherwise, right? There's no other tool available that could do that for you, really. So I think that experimentation, that playfulness, that's what somebody who has a degree from SVSU, they're experienced with that. I think they're well positioned to really be leaders. And you see it in the classroom, right? The students who are using AI very, very effectively are the students who are already the most skilled, right? They're the ones who they've come in, they have more advanced reading skills, they have a broader knowledge, et cetera. All that stuff is going to be useful because the reality is, as much as the AI knows, you have to know a lot as a user to be able to figure out, well, what would you want to know, right? It's sort of that paradox, which is that it's not until you are fully aware of what you don't know that you can actually ask the good questions and that you can move forward. If your own sense of your knowledge is very, very limited, and you're not aware of the things that you're not aware of, it's AI is not going to be particularly helpful, right? So I think that our graduates, our alumni, are actually in a really good position, that even though they might not have used AI at all, to like take it and really run with it and imagine things for their own companies, their own professions that no one's doing yet.
It makes me think of a question I asked you just a few months ago. I don't know if you remember this. I came to you saying, I really wish there was some type of prompt library. Right? Because I'm the type that wants to pull things off the shelf, put it. I want to go. It's the actuator, the activator in me. We were talking about Clifton's strengths in a previous conversation. And do you remember your response to me?
I probably said, don't bother.
Your exact response was advice I took on the spot, and it was like, well, ask it to prompt you, and I started to see prompts in different areas that were giving me a more robust answer, and a more robust problem solved along the way. And I usually ask ChatGPT, what's the best prompt? I want to do all these things. What's the best prompt I should ask you?
Right.
And it's funny because it gives me a little bit of a sarcasm back, because that's just my natural way I write.
Yeah.
And then we start from that point going on, and it's kind of changed the way we've done.
And it's interesting because really, like, the foundation there is that a prompt is communication, right? And a prompt is communication at a very high level, because you're setting parameters of various kinds. I need you to play this role as the AI. I need you to look at these kinds of sources. I need you to consider these factors. I need a response in this format, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of things going on there. To write that is somewhat challenging because there are things that you're going to leave out. This is where the crowd knowledge of AI is so powerful, is because it can take your general sense of, this is what I want my prompt to be, and when you ask it, turn that into a better prompt. It fills in the blanks, right? Based on what it knows about human communication, what it's seen as patterns, and what it also knows about the things that you're interested in from all your other prompts. And you're right. It does give you then a prompt that usually returns much better results.
It's so... and we are still on topic. Don't worry, we're going, but we have officially entered a rabbit hole.
Sure.
And I want to make sure we explore.
I've got one more to go down. So.
I love it.
Two more.
One of the things that you said earlier when we were talking about leadership in the CEO level and how they do it is, viewing the perspectives. As you were saying that just a second ago, the light bulb went off in my head. I've watched. I took a Clifton Strengths Finder. It's part of our professional curriculum here at the university. It's been very helpful. I really enjoy it. But I've watched my Clifton Strengths, my top 5 strengths, completely cycle out in the last 5 years. And it made me, when it happened this past January, I kind of said, I'm like, what's going on? Like, that doesn't... I see, all these as my strengths, but how did I lose all of these and gain all of these? My number one strength was ideation, being able to see multiple perspectives all at a time. And I'm like, maybe that's the effect that AI has had on me, because that's what I've been asking it. Where are my blind spots? And doing that. And so it's interesting, even in a personal anecdote. I'd be interested to hear from other professionals if you're out there. Well, email us, let us know. But do you see it changing even the strengths that we have?
That's a good question. So, I mean, it's a question that's a very real one. People are asking that. What is it? I just was looking at a paper today. What are the potential cognitive impacts of using AI, right? And no one knows for sure what those are.
I might be in trouble.
2 more rabbit holes related
let's
to
do
that.
it.
So one is people have thought a lot about prompting as a writing exercise. But voice-to-text capabilities now are really good. There's this tool called Whisper Glide. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I haven't, so it's getting written down.
One of the librarians uses this, and he's
I want to give I just want to give a good shout out to the library. SBS, is that those the folks who work there, Anita, and all of the staff and all of your librarians. If you're an SVSU alum, please come and visit. They have been extremely influential and instrumental in the AI work that we've done, and I'd be remiss if they didn't get a really big high five during all this talk. They're awesome people.
They're doing an AI literacy week starting March 24th. They've got a selection of AI books out. So they're really pushing the boundaries of like figuring out what's the future of a library in an AI world. Because we can't get into that, but boy, there are huge implications there for research and how it's done.
Let's jump back in the rabbit hole. I'm sorry, I just want to make sure.
So librarian Kyle Byland, I'll give him a shout out by name. He's their kind of resident AI expert, just came on board back in October. He uses this tool called Whisper Glide. And so what it does is he talks to his computer. It takes what he's saying, it edits it in real time, and creates the transcript. So for example, if he's using ChatGPT, instead of typing in his prompt, he uses the whisper glide. He speaks a prompt. So, and I mean, he's very, very fluent.
Yeah.
He can get like a 1-page prompt just from talking to it. But it formats it all, tidies it all up, and then he just hits enter, and it goes from there. But he can do it with all it. It works across multiple apps, so it's a very, very useful tool. And I think it's definitely the future for AI, which is because it's multimodal. There isn't really probably a reason to be typing so much. I mean, I still am doing it, but that's because of habit, not because it's not the most efficient way to go. It's we're much closer to that sort of Star Trek computer. It's Siri was sort of like the first step in that, but we're really now moving it to the point where it's not just Siri. This is a real research assistant that is voice activated.
Amazing.
So, and then the second rabbit hole, just for fun, to get people, if they haven't, they're not sure, well, what should I look for? Rabbithole.com is like an AI Wikipedia, and it is very, very fun because you ask it a question and it gives you a short little paragraph in response, just like a little Wikipedia article, and it has hyperlinks in it. And you can follow the hyperlinks, but you also can just ask a question about what it gave back. And it's a rabbit hole because it keeps opening up to the right hand of your screen. So you're literally going down these holes, evil. link. And it sounds like Wikipedia when you describe it that way, but it's not, because you're generating the next question.
Sure.
It's really, really pretty fun.
My wife is gonna get a letter from you, or you're gonna get a letter from her, because I already can tell that's
you'll have gone down the rabbit hole.
Oh, completely.
Like Nick, come back.
I have 3 topics right now at the top of my head that I want. That's amazing. It's amazing to think that that AI will even lead us into some of those conversations.
Right.
It knows along the way.
Right. And that curiosity, I mean, that's really I think the key to leveraging AI, in your, whatever your business capacity, professional capacity is like, okay, what are you curious about? Yeah. How can you expand the horizons of the possible, of what if you had this tool at your disposal?
Do you think that curiosity, we've always talked in the tech world about early adopters, in the marketing world. We talk about early adopters, and then that's the money's made after the early adopters have already made their mark. At what point do you think we are with AI right now? Are we in early adopter phase where there's a few of us who are really using it intently, and the mass group, like, have you seen research out there that says of our 53,000 alumni, how many do you think are using AI daily?
So I have seen some research. Again, I'm always a little skeptical of the research that I see, because it's not done by university faculty. Methodology matters.
Absolutely.
Right? The research that I've seen, it's always done by an organization that has some vested interest in technology. So right away, I'm like a little bit skeptical. But I saw at the beginning of this year a pretty good, it looked to me like a well-designed research study, because they were looking at employees, at working professionals, to gauge the extent to which they were experienced with AI and the extent to which they used AI in the job force. And I do not remember the statistics off the top of my head, but it's something like, a fifth of professionals are using AI and are also experienced. And they were very careful of how they defined experience. They didn't count anyone. You couldn't self-report your experience, right? Because that's a real problem with survey research, is people will say, oh yeah, I'm really good at this, but they're not. So the survey required them to answer some questions and to write some prompts, et cetera, for particular purposes. That was a really good way of gauging what their knowledge level really is. And then for experience, it was how many AI subscriptions do you have? Right. So you had to have 2 to be at the level of an experienced user. And then the amount that you used it, it had to be multiple times per day.
Yeah.
So those people that were the most experienced users were also the ones who reported the most benefit from it. Now, that's, of course, a correlation problem, right?
Sure.
Which is, it could very well be that they're in roles where AI is very useful. And so, of course, they're getting benefits from it. Maybe some of the people who aren't using it and are not getting benefits from it are just not in roles where its utility is obvious.
Sure. It's interesting. I would think about. Okay,
all right.
We have gone way over.
Hopefully, this will get edited down to just the best 10
I don't know.
minutes.
This is I find this stuff so interesting and helpful to talk about, and I think that's part of what we hope to do with this podcast is just to open up the conversation with alumni and say, okay, here's our knowledge point. Here are some experts and what we think about. Let's open up that conversation so we can help and do that. So in that idea of help, we always ask the one final question.
Sure.
That's not on our list here, but it's one that we make sure to make a point to ask, and that is, okay, I want you to talk to that alum out there who's just starting in their profession, and AI is introduced as maybe having an impact on what they can be, what they can do with their job. What's one piece of advice you would give an alum of SVSU about AI in their workplace?
Just one piece of advice.
The big one, whatever the big one might be. I know there's a million of them, but
I think explore it, experiment with it, learn about it now proactively, rather than waiting for someone to ask you, what do you know about it? That would be my advice. So, and you might not be able to do that in the workspace itself.
Sure.
But take some time to learn about this.
That's perfect, because it goes back to this whole idea of us having that autonomy of critical thinking.
Right.
And
then a piece of personal advice on top of that.
Yeah.
My spouse has a rule for me, 5-minute limit on how long you can talk about AI at home.
I'd be in so much trouble.
Right. So
that's amazing. Well, hopefully you'll be able to do that. That's amazing. Well, thank you, Dr. Trump. We really appreciate your time and all of your knowledge on the subject area. I've really enjoyed our conversation on this.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks for everyone who listened too.
I think it's going to be probably one of our biggest episodes. So it's awesome.
All right.
For those of you out there, thank you for joining us again on the Cardinal Standout in Your Career podcast. As always, if there's a way that we can help through the Alumni Relations Office with your career or just connecting back to the institution, know that there's an open door here waiting for you. And we would love to do that in any way possible. We want you to go out and stand out in your community. And remember, it's a great day to be a Cardinal. Thank you very much.